Hey there. This is a video for those of you who are pretty new to Rhino and just want to get your bearings, get some of the basics set up. I'm going to run through a bunch of commands and kind of settings just to help you kind of make the most of this program and figure out how to use it best. So first and foremost, establish your model units. So you can go to Tools, Options, and if you go down to Units right here, I like to keep it on inches. You've got a lot of options. Inches, and then distance display. I like to go feet and inches, and then usually around 1/8 of an inch in terms of how much resolution you've got. Next up is grid display. So if you're in a wireframe view, then typically you're going to see this grid. Some people like it, don't like it. I've gone, right now, I don't mind it. But if you ever want to get rid of it, go to grid, click all that stuff off. Or if you want to keep it on, there you go. Next up is aliases, because a lot of this stuff is key commands. It's going to be the fastest way to work. Maybe you start with buttons, but you kind of build up to key commands and shortcuts. Really what you want to do is you want to establish a number of shortcuts that are just going to kind of speed things along. So I don't have a bunch. These are the ones that I use. And these are, I'll be using these in this demonstration. So you can change them here. You can import them if you know somebody who has aliases that seem to work well. That's a good way to do it. And then next is really getting display modes that work right. So right now I'm in wireframe. If I switch to like a rendered view, it's still not that great. Like I want a little bit more definition. I don't want to see the gray background. So I go to Tools, Options, and then really I want to go down to View and Display Modes. And the thing that's most important to me is getting the rendered view set up right. So I really just go back and forth between wireframe and rendered view. And you'd notice that I have W for wireframe and R for rendered view in my aliases, so I can move back and forth between the two. So one is, let's go to a white background for this. So solid color, pick white. That's going to clean things up. Another is changing the lighting method to ambient occlusion. I think that just kind of works really nicely. And then another is just to get some more definition in the objects is to open this up, go into objects and surfaces, and then change the edge thickness for surface edge settings to 1. And so now you have this nice you have shading, you've got edge definition, and then it just has some clarity to it. And then one other thing that I do is, because I use this white background, when I pick things, they're yellow, and sometimes it's hard to see that. So go to Tools, Options again, and then under Appearance, open that up, Colors. I like to change selected objects to cyan. So now when I pick on something, it's a little bit more visible. If I switch to wireframe, still visible. So back and forth between the two. Cyan seems to work a little bit better than yellow. Okay, next up, ISO curves. This is a little confusing to me. It used to be like everything would always have ISO curves. Those were those sort of like lines that would get generated on surfaces. If they're showing up for you, they don't seem to show up for me, but if they're showing up for you and you want to get rid of them, you can go to General and turn it off, on or off there. You can also go into View, Display Modes, Rendered, Objects, Surfaces, and then get rid of the ISO curve width there, make it 0. If they're showing up, that's a good way to get rid of them and make that all cleaned up. Okay, next up, viewports. I typically go back and forth between 4 viewports and 1. So 4, you just double click on the view that you want. So perspective to top, top to right. And just as you double click between those, that's really how you move between 4 and 1. Just getting around the project. So pan, zoom, zoom extent, zoom selected. So pan, for me, the way I do it is I hold down Shift and I right click, and that lets me pan. I zoom mostly in and out with the wheel, but I can also do the zoom command, type Z, because I have an alias for that. Zoom extents, ZE. I can do it as, yeah, I can do it as zoom, enter, and then extents there, or just ZE. And then that'll just bring you back to everything, because sometimes you get lost, you kind of don't know where you are, and then you just type ZE, and boom, you're back. And zoom selected is sometimes you get to a place where, you know, things are kind of like out of, you're not kind of rotating around the thing you want to see. And so just select something and type ZS, and you're back to zoom selected, and it'll kind of reorient you straight back to that thing that you want. So those are just helpful ways to get you around the project. Okay, shifting gears here just in terms of the way that the model works. You can think of it as a kind of hierarchy of points, lines, polylines, curves, surfaces, and polysurfaces. So over here on the toolbars, I don't have a lot of toolbars up, but basically I've got points, I've got lines, I've got surfaces, and then I've got some other things that I can do, some other commands. But this is just the sort of basics. So points, if I hold this down, I can do like a single point, I can do multiple points. So, you know, the sort of logic of Rhino is that you can create points, you can extract points. That's the sort of fundamental unit of the geometry that we're working with. Lines are, typically I do polylines because polylines are, you know, just kind of multi-segment lines. But what's interesting is that when you click on it, it calls it a curve. And so, you know, that's just the sort of terminology within Rhino, is that lines are really curves. So there's curves and surfaces are made up of curves. So those two things are kind of interchangeable. And polylines are really just, you know, multi-segment lines. And you can break these apart if you want, and we can get into that. So that's actually an explode command. I don't think I have this further down the line, but you can break this up into multiple segments, and then you can also rejoin them back. So if I type in join, so now that's one again. So you go from lines to polylines, and then explode them into individual lines. And then surfaces. So surfaces are really, you know, if you take something like this, I can make that into a surface. So 3 closed lines, or a polyline turns into a surface. I typed in SRF. So you can do that over here by creating a surface from planar curves. You can just draw a surface directly like that. So there's surfaces, and then there's also polysurfaces, which is really, and we'll get into this in a second, but when you create kind of quote unquote solids, they're actually just multiple surfaces all kind of linked together, joined together, and that's a polysurface. So a solid is really a polysurface in Rhino. And that's just kind of the basic logic of how all this stuff works. Just quick detour into some drawing commands over here. I'm going to switch to a top view for this. So circle, I've got that set up as a C. Rectangle, REC. Trim, so trimming is, I do TR. And this is really just kind of like using one thing to cut another thing. So I'm going to select my cutting object, hit enter, select the object to trim. So I can use one thing to trim another. I can do TR like that. I can kind of draw a line here, TR, do that. So crossing window, you notice that I went this way instead of that way. It makes a difference. So this one, you have to kind of go all the way around. That's not going to grab anything. Whereas if you're going right to left, just so long as you touch it, then that's going to get stuff. So trimming, super handy. Extend. So this would be a case where you've got like a line like this, and you want to extend it into that. And then I can kind of extend it further. You have to establish the thing you want to extend to. Fillet is if you want to kind of create like a rounded edge, or sometimes even just a sharp edge between two things. So I'm going to start with a fillet that has a radius of 0, and I'm going to go from this to this. So it's going to basically give me a nice sharp edge right there, and then I'll do another one, radius of 6 inches. and then it gives me a curve there. And yeah, so fillet's super handy. Offset, I've got that set to O. And basically it's just offsetting a curve. I can make it 4, 6, 8, whatever sort of looks right, feels right. And then if you join something, it'll offset all that together. So 1, 2, 3, join all of those, offset it by, let's say 2. So yeah, and then, curved Boolean. So this is one that I actually just discovered this kind of recently. A friend showed me this one and it seems to be kind of handy. So sometimes you just have kind of a mess of lines and you want something that's basically inside of that. So curved Boolean, select the curves. I'm going to pull a crossing window, hit enter, and then you just click inside and hit enter. And then there you go. Now you've got, it just kind of auto generates that curve for you. So a lot easier than doing a bunch of trims. Okay, on we go. Extrude, curve, and cap. So really basic command. I'm going to extrude this up, and there's a couple things. So you can do it with or without a cap. It says, there's a bunch of things. You can say both sides, so you can kind of go up and down. Usually I'm just going one. Sometimes you do both, and it says solid yes or no. So if I do yes, it's going to give me a cap. If I do no, it's actually going to show it as open. So I'm seeing through that thing. And then if I ever want to, and I decided I wanted to cap it, I can just type in cap. Moving stuff around. So let's do that again. If you want to move something around. So a lot of people keep gumball on, and they kind of move stuff this way, like that. I'm not a huge fan of gumball, so I typically keep that off. If I need to move something, usually what I do is I kind of establish a direction and then I'll move it. So I'll say, like, let's say I want to move it 6 feet. I'll type in 6 feet and then I'll hold down shift. And that way there's a very sort of controlled approach where oftentimes I'm referencing other geometry. So I'm going to do that again. So let's say I wanted to move it. You'll notice how I'm actually kind of using points to kind of reference that. And then holding down. So if I type in the distance first, 4 feet, and then hold down shift, it's going to make sure that it's going orthogonally. Another thing that you can do is if you want to do it relative to something, you can use the tab command, which is kind of handy. So like, let's say I know that I want to do it relative to that midpoint. What I do is I hit the tab command, and that's going to constrain that, and it'll allow me to move it along that direction. And then ortho, if you want to, I don't know, this seems like a little bit tedious. Well, one is you can get kind of smart tracking. It'll kind of snap if you sort of hold it into the right spot. And then the other is you can turn on ortho, and then it'll kind of force it into that 90. You have to kind of go back and forth there. So a bunch of ways to do that. Let's see, mirror, rotate 3D. So if you want to mirror something, here I'm going to, so this is one where I draw the line that I want to use for the mirror. So let's say that, I know that I want to move this over 6 inches, and then I mirror based on that. So that's one way to do it. Rotating RO, and then rotating 3D. So that's something where sometimes, let me do that again, as a solid. So sometimes you want to rotate something in kind of a different direction. And so rotate 3D is really handy. And what I'll do is I'll draw an axis, and then it'll allow me to basically kind of rotate that around that axis. So that's kind of handy. Scale and scale 1D. Scale is pretty easy. You establish a base point, and you can either just type in a scale. Let's say I want it to be 4 times bigger. It'll do that, or I can do it graphically. So scale, boom, like that. And then scale 1D is basically like a stretch. So I have that as SC, but scale 1D. So you do kind of like 2 reference points. and it'll basically just stretch it. So you have to make sure that the geometry doesn't have any irregularity to it or any kind of like, it has to be very sort of consistent geometry for that to work nicely. Like a table, if you sort of scale the table 1D, the legs are going to stretch along with the table. But it's a nice way to just kind of adjust the kind of dimensions of things, especially if you know what you want that to be. If I want that to be 2 feet tall, and then I want that to be 1 foot wide, you can start to do things that way, kind of start with something rough and then come back and touch it up. Copy and copy and place. So copy is pretty easy. So this is not like copy and paste like you would up here, like, you know, with your menu. This is CO, so it's a copy in here, and then I'm just copy, 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 copy. And then oftentimes what I'll do is I'll do a CO and then in place. And once I have that in place, then what I can do is I can kind of bring it away, and I'll have like a duplicate of it. Explode. So I showed this a little bit earlier. If you've got a poly surface, what you can do is you can explode it, turn it into a bunch of surfaces. You'll notice that it's not a solid, it's basically just a bunch of surfaces. And then that goes back to, so explode and then join is the other one, where you can kind of bring all those back. And then if I wanted to cap it, boom. Extract surface is handy. This is an instance where if you want to grab something out of it, so let's say I want that surface, and I can choose to copy that surface or not. I'm going to say no. And if I kind of move that out of the way, now it keeps all of this. It didn't like explode it. It just allows me to sort of pull that surface out. And I can do that as an uncopied extraction too. Let me do that one more time, because every now and then you want to grab a surface. Oops, let me do that. Copy, yes, grab a surface. And then now that surface is basically a duplicated surface of that. And it doesn't take away the one that was there. Duplicate face border. This is one where sometimes you just want the line work from this. And there's, you know, there's a few ways you could do it. You could just draw the line work like that. And so that's one way, but sometimes it's easier just to duplicate the, oops, that's weird. Sometimes it's just easier to duplicate the line work by doing duplicate face border. And I have DFB, that's one of my shortcuts because I use this one a lot. So I just click on the faces that I want to duplicate. And now those are lines that I've pretty much duplicated out of that surface. Cut plane, use this a ton. So cut plane is really what you're doing is you're establishing a line through an object, and it'll build a surface that cuts through that. And it's always going to be based on whatever your construction plane is. So if you do it in a top view, if you do it in a front view, you'll get different results. And then once you have that, you can split the object. So type in split, select the object to split, hit enter, cutting object. So that's really what that cut plane is for. It doesn't do anything until you split. So those two go hand in hand. And then another is to do a 3-point cut plane, which is, so let's say you want to do something that is not kind of orthogonal. Select this. And so let's say I want to go from there to there. Oops, let me do that again. Cut plane, 3-point, and I want to go 1, 2, and let's say something like that. So now it's going to give me a cut plane based on those 3 points. Let me try that one more time. Get something a little bit more challenging. 3-point. Yeah, like that. And then I'm going to split that. And then kind of going back to capping, if I tried to cap this, it's not going to know how to do it because it just, you know, there's too many ways that you could cap that. So I'm going to build a surface like that. I'm going to build a surface like that. And now if I join all of these, it should, boom, it knows how to cap that. project to C-plane. This is one where sometimes you've got line work that's in kind of like three-dimensional space and you want to project that down onto the C-plane and really kind of like flatten it out. So project to C-plane, delete input object. I'm going to say no. And so you can see that what it does is it just takes that and it projects it down onto the C-plane. You can also project onto surfaces. There's a bunch of ways that you can use that. And then lastly for this one, color, material, and texture, just to give things a little bit more definition. So I've got this right here. If I wanted to, so there's a couple things I can adjust. I can adjust the color of the lines and I can adjust the material. So let's say that I wanted to change the material. I'm just going to make it custom. I'm going to go to something, let's say red or kind of like that. Put that on, oops, put that on there. So now change the layer. So this layer, everything on that is going to be this red. If I zoom out, yeah, all of that stuff changed. Let's say that I wanted to change the color of the line work. If I wanted to make it more of like a dark gray or whatever, those are the two kind of controls that I have. And then if I wanted to give it some materiality, what I'm going to do, I'm going to switch this one onto wood. Right now, wood doesn't have any definition. So I click on the circle there, change this to, I'm going to change this to a custom material. And then here, what I'm going to do is change the color. So if you notice, oops, what I did was I went down to textures and then I take a surface texture, like a image map that I got off the internet, and then that gets applied to it. And now it's going to start to map that on. And there's, some things it'll start to kind of stretch, and there's some things that you can do to get this to work out a little bit better. Usually what I do, and there's a whole other kind of study of this, but try to find something that generally matches what you've got. And then you can go to right here, texture mapping. And if you do box mapping, it's going to basically establish a kind of relationship between that shape that you just box mapped and the image. And so now that I've got that established, what I can do is I can match the mapping and then select the source object. And now it's going to take this and it's going to match it to that. And you can see kind of just right there where the seams are. And so it gets everything to kind of match up a little bit more nicely. And then let's say in this case, just so that it looks a little bit more realistic without getting into kind of landscape stuff, I'm just going to change the color here a little bit for the lines, just to make it a little bit more like the wood, and make that a little bit darker. And so now it's not just like black lines. So, okay, those are some things that you can do, and that should get you pointed in the right direction. Good luck.